Dr. Silverstone, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thank you for talking about this, which is an absolutely crucial part of both the short-term and long-term impacts of the fires.
Yep.
You noted that we had, sorry to jump in, you noted that we had studied this. I was part of a team, and we did a lot of short-term and long-term follow-up of the people who went through the Fort McMurray fires, and it's not actually a good news story.
No, not at all. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there, Doctor. Maybe you can just help people that maybe they're not realizing they're having this psychological impact and explain, first, what should they notice? What are things that they can notice?
Thank you. There's the obvious short-term issues. We get anxious. Will I have to evacuate? Will I not? If I have to evacuate, what will happen to my property? And clearly dealing with life and limb is the immediate priority, obviously. But these psychological impacts are very significant, very profound, and not surprisingly, they impact not just the family members, but also, and not just the adults, but also the children. And then often what is more damaging is the fact that over the long term, and we're talking months, weeks and months, is that a lot of people will have very negative responses to the changes. Sometimes they have gone through some of those terrifying ordeals we see on TV, driving through fires and having risk. They'll have flashbacks and other concerns. They'll have anxieties about whether they'll can happen again. If they've lost properties or home, they'll have anxiety or worry about that. And the key is to recognize that these are both appropriate. It's appropriate to have anxiety, but also that seeking help is also highly appropriate. A lot of people feel, no, I should just push on. No, I'm going to ignore it. And that is not good for them or anybody else. So I think my key message is try and get increased resiliency. We can talk about that in a minute. Mm-hmm. And secondly, if you know anybody who's gone through it, reach out to them, see how they are, follow up with them, give them support. And for individuals who are going through this, recognize that they may well have an impact and that they should be looking out for it, both among themselves and their family.
It was interesting. I was chatting with a couple who are helping with evacuees with donations, but one of the things they mentioned is that a lot of people just want to come in and say, I'm feeling this, and to be able to share how they're feeling. Is that something that people should be encouraged to do and help? You're mentioning that families should recognize this, but even at a place like an evacuation center.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, and that's really sensible advice. One of the things that we need as humans for psychological well-being is support. And there has been a lot of stigma in the past about talking about feeling bad things, the British stiff upper lip, for example, no, let's just carry on. These things have a real impact, and being able to vocalize them, to speak to people is important. And that's why I say reach out, because sometimes you'll open a gate, you'll open a door where someone can confide, hey, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling anxious. And just listening to them empathically, not necessarily trying to solve the problems, but just being aware that they have problems and letting them vocalize it is really important. So I'm glad that did come up.
And also stigma, something you mentioned too. If you are feeling not normal or just not yourself, that's okay, I think is what has to be expressed too.
Yes, and there's certainly a lot of evidence from studies we've done and others have done about helping people long term. Just to emphasize that after the Fort McMurray fire, it is no surprise that those people who lost their homes had a bigger psychological impact. I strongly caution anybody who's at risk of leaving their home to make sure that anything that has emotional value for them, they take care of. If they can't take it with them, make sure it's in a place that's less likely to be destroyed by fire. As a personal example, I have a colander. It's my only possession that my grandmother had, and I treasure it. I would hate to lose it. Well, people in a fire can lose everything, and it's often the long-term impact of those losses, those memories that can't be recovered, that can really impact them. So that's part of it. The second is to start thinking about, okay, what will I do if? And then if you do have to move, recognize that that can be very traumatic for everybody involved. How can you create a sense of relative normalcy for children or other family members, knowing that everything is changing all the time? It's a very difficult, stressful situation, and being able to talk about and get support is critical. So thank you for making awareness of this so key at this time.
I think that colander is going to stick in my mind now for a long time. So make sure you get those treasured possessions that you can carry. That will help with that. Is that increased resilience?
Yes, increasing psychological resilience is essentially preparation. How can I prepare for it? Now, some people say, hey, I shouldn't worry too much. But in fact, thinking things through and coming up with plans does help us deal with things, even if they're not what we imagine. So if I have to evacuate, what do I need to take? If I have to think about my child's schooling, are there relatives we can go to? If I have to store valuables, what shall I do about photographs? All of these things, it may be worth thinking through in advance so that if you do have to be in that situation, having thought about it beforehand will help you address it and will reduce the potential for psychological damage.
There's so much more we can talk about, but I'm glad we had the opportunity just to help maybe some people out there who are feeling probably a lot stressed because of these fires.
Thank you. And lastly, as I've said, talking about them is probably the most helpful thing. And shows such as yours, making sure that the psychological aspects are at least addressed at this difficult time will help people. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on with us. I truly appreciate it. Dr. Peter Silverstone at the University of Alberta, thank you kindly.